Okay, so once you have all of this data typed in your list, L1 is where Team 1 state is, L2 is where Team 2 state is, you go back to Stat and press it, but this time we want to calculate. So go over to Calc, and then this is one variable statistics, because the only variable in this scenario is the age of the team member, right? So we're only dealing with one variable, so hit Enter. Now, see how mine popped up L2? If yours did not pop up with an L1, we need to change it, okay? Because the first thing I need to do is figure out the mean, median, and quartile 1 of L1, because that's where I put this data. Look down here, see the 1? What's above it in blue? Okay, so I hit second and then 1, and it'll replace it with an L1. So make sure you have L1 right there. And now go down and hit calculate, and it'll pull up all the information you need. What does X bar stand for? Mean. So that's your mean for Team 1, 24.7. Okay, we also need to know the median and quartile 1. If you go down, you'll see both of those. The median's 24, and the median is also known as your Q2. And then Q1 is 21. So the median is 24, and quartile 1 is 21. So now we have all the information we need for Team 1, because that's the only things they talked about in the choices. Now we need to find that same information for Team 2. We need to find the mean, we need to find the median, and we need to find the quartile 1. So I go back to my calculator, and I go back to Stat, Calc, one variable. But this time, I'm trying to figure out the data for Team 2, which we put in L2, correct? So I need to change this to L2 by hitting second 2. Because see above the 2, you see L2 in blue? And now hit calculate. Okay, what is the mean for this team's data? Guys, what's the mean for their ages? 28.2. What is their median? 27. And what is their Q1? 25. So now that you have all the information that was discussed in the choices, we can compare them. Is A correct? Is the mean for Team 1 greater? No. The mean for Team 1 is less than this one. So is B correct? The mean for Team 2 is greater? Yes. So technically on this problem, you could have got the right answer without the calculator, because all of you know how to calculate the mean of data. You just add them all up and divide by how many there are. But you may get to questions on the EOC that ask about other things, like the quartiles or the interquartile range or the median. And that's why knowing how to get that information in the calculator will be helpful and save you time. Like, what if the question had asked, what's the interquartile range? How do you find the IQR, the interquartile range? Does anybody remember how to find the IQR? The quartile 3 minus the quartile 1. So you would just look in the calculator, you would go down until you see quartile 3, and you would subtract quartile 1 from it, and then that number would be your IQR, your interquartile range. You remember it now? Okay, so now I need you to turn to page 4 in your packet. Okay, page 4 is a continuation of what we were learning Friday. Okay, so page 4 should not be any different than what we did Friday. Look at number 11. This polynomial is a binomial or trinomial? Trinomial. Isn't this a trinomial, just set equal to 0? So the first thing we need to do to it is factor it by bubble method. And to do that, we're looking for two numbers that do what? Right, what numbers multiply to equal 40 and add to equal a negative 13? Correct. Negative 8 times negative 5 is positive 40, and when you add them, you get a negative 13. So far, though, all we've done is factored it. On these, because they're set equal to 0, they also want you to solve, which is when you do the next step, you set each of the factors equal to 0. And then you just solve each equation. To solve this equation for x, what do? Add 8 to cancel it on this side, and you add it to the other side, making x equal 8. Now, the reason that's a solution is because if you took the time to plug in the 8 for x, 8 squared minus 13 times 8 plus 40 would equal what? 0. Now, to solve this one for x, what would we do? Yes? Yes, but the reason I need you to work on this step, even though, yes, eventually you'll skip it, is because the factors are not always going to be this simple. Sometimes you might end up with a number beside the x, so you would have to add and divide. So you need to learn why this step is there so that when they get harder, you'll know to set it equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay, so for this one, we would add 5, and our second solution would be positive 5. And that's because if you plugged in 5 and squared it, and then subtracted 13 times 5 plus 40, you would get 0. And those are the only two numbers that would do that. No other number, when plugged in for the x's, would make this equation equal 0. Only 8 and 5. What else did we learn about those two numbers? On Friday, what else did I show you about? Right, watch this. If I go to the calculator and I go to y equals, and I graph this, x squared minus 13x plus 40. Oops, I forgot to clear it out. Okay, let me try it again. X squared minus 13x plus 40. It'll form a parabola because we're dealing with a quadratic equation. Okay, quadratic means the highest exponent is 2. That parabola intersects the x-axis at two places. Those are known as x-intercepts. They're also known as zeros. And where are they located? 5 and 8, which were our final answers, right? But now the reason you still need to know how to do this is because on the test, some of the answers are left in factored form. Not all of them go all the way down to the solutions. So you still have to know how to factor it. So let's look at number 12. Is it a binomial or trinomial? Binomial. So can we just bubble method it, Zach? No, we can't. Pay attention. Whenever it's a binomial, the first thing you do is you look at it and decide if they have anything in common. Do these two terms look like they're going to have something in common? Yeah, they both have an m. So look, write them out. But it doesn't matter because look, m squared is m times m, and 7m is 7 times m. So they have 1m in common. And that 1m is your GCF that you factor out. And then when you factored it out, you're basically like undistributing it, and it leaves what there? Okay, look. M squared was first, correct? And from the m squared, what was left? M. And then bring down the minus. 7m is second, and from 7m, what remains? So it has to be m minus 7 in that order. Because think about it. M times m is m squared. M times negative 7 is negative 7m. If you were to reverse that order, it would not make sense when you distributed. Now, just like we did over here, you're going to set both factors equal to 0. M equals 0, and that one's done. There's nothing more to do. And then m minus 7 equals 0, which means we're going to have to add the 7 to the other side, making our second solution a positive 7. And just like always, we can graph it. If I go to my y equals screen and type in x squared minus 7x, look what will happen. Y equals x squared minus 7x. It's froze on the minus. Okay, you go ahead and graph it. X squared minus 7x. Okay, so when we graph x squared minus 7x, it looks like this. It crosses in two places. One of those places is 0 on the x-axis, and the other one's 7. And those were our two solutions. So is there really any reason to miss this type of question on the test? No. All right, number 13. Is it a binomial or trinomial? Trinomial. The a value is 1, so that means I can go straight to the bubble method. Correct. M minus 7, M minus 3, because those two numbers multiply to make a positive 21, and they add to make a negative 10. And like Leah was asking a while ago, when they're this simple, you pretty much know this is going to end up being M equals positive 7 and N equals positive 3. But you have to remember why, because they might not always be that simple. So you have to remember to set them equal to 0 if it's not just a letter and one number. If it's got a number out front, you need to set the whole thing to equal to 0 and solve for M. Does that make sense? Okay, and then if you graph it, where do you think it's going to cross? 7 and 3. What else do you know about those numbers and this trinomial? Why else are those the solutions? We just talked about this a second ago. Because 7 squared minus 10 times 7 plus 21 equals 0, and so does 3 squared minus 10m plus 21. Those are the only two numbers that will actually make this equal 0. All right, number 14. What kind of polynomial are we dealing with here? A binomial. So if you did try to do it this way, if you wrote out both terms, this would be n times n, and this would be 5 times 5. Do they have anything in common? No. So this is not a greatest common factor binomial. This is what kind of binomial? No, it can be factored. And yes, you do bubble method, but what type of binomial is it? You got to look at your factoring flow chart. Difference of two squares. Think about it. It's a difference because they're subtracting. Tanaja, move back to your seat. And they're both perfect squares. And on the flow chart, it shows you that you create two binomials. To make an n squared, it's an n times an n. And to make a 25, it's a 5 times a 5. But for it to be negative, they have to be opposite. What else happens because of them being almost identical except for their signs? What else does that cause? If we were to double distribute this, n, right, the middle cancels out because n times n makes the n squared. 5 times negative 5 makes the negative 25. But the reason this one has a middle and this one doesn't is because, look, your outer terms produce a negative 5n while your inners produce a positive 5n, and they cancel each other out, which is why there's no n to the first term. Now you just set both of them equal to 0, which will end up causing this one to be a negative 5, and will cause this one to be a positive 5. And just like any other one, you can graph this. All you have to do is go to the calculator and type in y equals x squared minus 25, and it will show you what its zeros are. Remember, zeros is just another word for x-intercepts. Okay, the calculator just not working on me today. X squared minus. All right, number 15. What type of polynomial is this? Trinomial. So what do we do? Bubble method. By looking for two numbers to do what? Time to wake people up. Okay, which are what numbers? 6 and 8. Okay, and then when you set v plus 6 equal to 0 and solve, it ends up being v equals negative 6, which is a number that when plugged in would make it equal 0, and it's a location where an x-intercept will be for the parabola. When you put v plus 8 equal to 0 and solve, you get v equals negative 8, which is your other number that when plugged in for the v's will make it 0, and which is your other x-intercept. Okay, now turn to page 5. All right, page 5. What's different about this trinomial? There's a number in front. So what do we need to do? No. We need to GCF. We need to see if that 5 will divide out of all three terms. Will it? Yes. And since it will, that means that 5 is the GCF. And so you write it on the outside. You're factoring it out, which is undistributing it. What trinomial remains when you divide 5 out of all 3 terms? Right? And now that we've factored out that 5, don't we have a trinomial that looks like the ones on the previous page that we can bubble method? By looking for 2 numbers that do what? Okay, and 5's prime. So the only numbers that will multiply to make that are correct. And it needs to be a negative 5 and a positive 1 so that they'll add to a negative 4. Now, if you were to set these to 0, watch what happens. If I take the 5 and I set it equal to 0, does that make any sense? No. When I set b plus 1 equal to 0, I'm just going to end up subtracting the 1 to solve for b, and so one of my 2 solutions is going to be a negative 1. And that's because 5 times negative 1 squared minus 20 times negative 1 minus 25 equals 0. This is also one of the x-intercepts of the parabola. Then I take the b minus 5 and set it equal to 0, and how do I solve it? Add the 5, and so b equals positive 5. And that's my other x-intercept, and it's the only other number that when plugged in for both b's will make this trinomial equal 0. Yeah. All right, number 22. What should I do first? Divide by 3. And so that's the GCF. And what trinomial remains? Correct. And now we have a trinomial that has a 1 in the front, so we can bubble method by looking for 2 numbers that do what? Okay, what numbers do that? Eight and 2. Okay, but if they want to add to be negative, which one of the numbers needs to be negative? The 8. The bigger number needs to get the sign that you're trying to make. Like if you're trying to add to get a negative, the bigger number needs to be negative. If you're trying to add them and keep it positive, the bigger number needs to be positive. Now, when I set the 3 equal to 0, it makes no sense. When I set b minus 8 equal to 0, to solve for the b, I'm going to have to add that 8 to the other side, giving me a positive 8 for one of my 2 solutions. And then when I set the b plus 2 equal to 0, I need to subtract the 2 over, making my second solution negative 2. So this parabola is going to cross the x-axis at 8 and negative 2. Those are also the 2 numbers that make this trinomial equal 0. All right, number 23, what do I do? Correct. Divide all 3 of them by 10. And that becomes a squared plus minus 8. Okay, and then I write 10 on the outside because I factored it out. And now what can I do? Bubble method by looking for 2 numbers that do what? Okay, so that would be correct, a positive 4 and a negative 2. And then when you set them equal to 0, the 10 basically just cancels out. The a plus 4, you'll have to subtract the 4 and get a equals negative 4. And then when you set a minus 2 equal to 0, you'll have to add the 2 and get a equals positive 2. Those are your 2 solutions because those are the 2 x-intercepts of the parabola. They're also known as zeros. And they're the 2 numbers that when plugged in this trinomial would actually make it equal 0. Okay, number 24. What do I do first? Well, yeah, you check and see if they're all divisible by 4, and they are. which makes 4 the GCF of the problem. And you factor it out, which leaves what trinomial? Okay? And now that you've done that, you have yourself a trinomial that's one of the easier kind because the A value is 1, and you can just bubble method by looking for two numbers that do what? Okay, what numbers is that? Okay. And now when you set 4 equals to 0, it doesn't make sense because it's not equal to 0. When you set k minus 6 equal to 0, won't you just end up adding the 6 to get k by itself? And you'll get a positive 6. And when you set k plus 2 equal to 0, what will you do? Right. You'll subtract 2 on both sides, making your second solution a negative 2. Those are the two x-intercepts of the parabola. That's where the parabola will cross through the x-axis. And those are the two numbers that will make this trinomial equal 0. All right, number 25. What do I do first? Divide by, well, yeah, first you check it. Say that it doesn't divide out of all three. What are you going to have to do then? Who remembers what you would have to do if you have a number that won't divide out of all three? Travis? The A times the C. Okay, what trinomial remains? Okay, and now that we've done that, we have one of the easy trinomials because it starts with a 1a squared, and so we can just bubble method by looking for two numbers that do what? Okay, what numbers do that? Correct. And then when you set 4 equal to 0, it doesn't make sense. When you set a minus 6 equal to 0, you'll end up adding the 6 to get it away from a, making your solution a positive 6. And when you set a plus 4 equal to 0, what will you do? You'll end up with a negative 4. And tell me what those two numbers represent. What are those two numbers for this trinomial? I've been saying it every time. What? They make it equal 0. Like if you plugged in a 6 here, and then typed all that in, you would get 0. Or if you did it with a negative 4, what else are those numbers? The x-intercepts. Look, if I graph this, y equals, oh, mine's not working. You'd have to graph it. If you go to y equals and type in 4x squared minus 8x minus 96 and you hit graph, that parabola is going to cross through the x-axis at a negative 4 and a positive 6. Okay, you need to finish the rest of page 4 and page 5. We still have 8 minutes, so you need to start working now, and I'll let you know when you can switch out.